Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. My name is Pojo, and today I get to talk about a new bundle of cards coming out Monday, May 4th, called Shadow of the Spire. So we have 23 new cards getting released in a bundle. It's not a full set, which is a little disappointing since we have already seen one full bundle come out over the course of this set, and this set has been a little bit difficult, I would say, as far as the meta is concerned. But even so, it's going to be a shot in the arm, so we are going to be seeing a bunch of new cards, and we get to talk about those cards today. So all of these cards will be available on Monday, but also there will be a pre-order release. If you purchase the pre-order, you get to play 5 of those cards early starting April 29th. So you'll be seeing the 5 cards that we are reviewing today available for play at that time. There's also a couple of other things that we'll talk about in the bundle. There's a new playmat, I think, which is particularly exciting. But yeah, by and large, it's mostly going to be April 29th and May 4th. New cards is the general message. So let's get to talking about those cards. There are some ups and downs here, starting with the obvious one, the promo, Icaria First Reaper, our 6-drop 5/5 at 6 Shadow Influence. So Icaria First Reaper is a Nightmare Valkyrie with flying and deadly. Summon, kill an enemy unit or site. Entomb, the enemy player discards each spell from their hand. Obviously, it's a pretty nasty card in terms of overall value. It also gives you immediate onboard interaction in the form of a very powerful removal spell, effectively a cremate without Voidbound, on top of a 5/5 flyer with deadly, which means that it trades well with basically any flyer on the board. It can even beat up like very, very big stuff like the 6/7 Eilin, that kind of thing. The Entomb ability also is a really nasty effect if you are facing off against unitless control decks. It's a little easy to get around for the most part. Like, people can play their last removal spell to kill Icaria, people can permafrost the card and get around it, people can silence it. So it is a rough effect if you can actually get it to go off on your opponent and they are playing a large amount of spells, but obviously it's a little hard to tell when they are sending up spells, and it's not something that you necessarily want to devour depending on what their situation is. So that Entomb effect is okay, but the summon effect is really the sort of thing that you're playing Icaria for, and the overall value of the card is just like very, very relevant when it comes to that. In Expedition, this is a solid dragon killer. It gets rid of a lot of the very, very big flyers on the format and then allows you to have a big blocker for the remaining flyers that also blocks stuff like the 4/4 charge with Quick Draw. So that kind of availability allows you to really like mess with some of the current meta stuff. We're always looking for things that shake up the current meta. Obviously, the disadvantage to Icaria is that it does have that very, very, very deep influence cost. Unless you are playing a deck that is basically entirely Shadow or has some array of Shadow fixers, i.e. strangers, or if it's doing something where you have like mostly Shadow but a very small splash of additional like seats or insignias, similar to the Argent mid-range decks that were popular, I think, in Flame of Zulta. Those kinds of decks can easily play Icaria First Reaper. Other decks are going to have a lot of problems getting this card to come down and play at the appropriate time. In terms of like overall lore, I'm less than enthused. I don't really think that a zombie Icaria was needed, and I think it's a little bit played out, but for some people this was a pretty exciting prospect, so certainly not going to deny them their fun. It is an unusual card to be certain. There's a lot of different stuff happening with it, but it promotes a sort of mono shadow lifestyle, which mono shadow seems to be a deck that is getting a little bit more pushed with the addition of the latest promo card, Aramot the Mind Splinter. So yeah, there's a little bit of a possibility to play around with this kind of stuff, and in normal setups you now have access to I believe a full Shadow Influence card at every single set up to 6. You have Tazbu at 5, you have Aramot at 4, you have Marionette Cross at 3, and stuff like Dream Snatcher at 2. So there's a lot of different availability for a mono shadow deck to just play on curve really nasty scary threats all the way up, which is kind of interesting to see. But yeah, that's Icaria. We also have the return of several other favorites and also nemesis. Jack is back with Open Contract, looking very much the worse for wear, a little bit 3D animated and like kind of looking like he's withering on the vine. I'm not really sure what's going on with his eyes right now. I think he's missing one, and also his other one is glowing very abruptly. It's a weird looking card. But let's go ahead and talk about the actual stats on it. It's a 1 cost that says kill a unit with cost 4 or less, reduce the cost of each unit in its owner's deck by 1. I'm not a big fan of the design of this card. I think overall, like, this is cheap removal for big threats, which is kind of interesting if you were playing it later in the format, if you want to get like a very aggressive start while also like opening up your opponent to stuff like Defile, Aramott's designs, anything along those lines. If you want to like deal with units by basically reducing their cost to the point that they're manageable with other cost matters cards, this has a little bit of an oomph to it. On the other hand, reducing the cost of each unit in an opponent's deck is very dangerous. You can obviously get some things that are very, very scary reduced to the point where they are actually much more scary. If you, for example, say put an Eileen, the 6/12 Eileen down to 7, then you're going to get wrecked pretty quickly as a result of that. A lot of like 8-cost summons and 7-cost summons are much more powerful if you can pick them up and play them a turn earlier, and giving people that extra turn on every single card in their deck is pretty nasty. Most decks run something between like 24 and 30 units, and that is a lot of different things to be reducing by 1. It basically just puts a lot of extra tempo into your opponent's deck. It doesn't really show you how it's going to make you lose until you sort of do lose. So I'm not really sure about the power level of this card. Obviously, it's very, very strong in terms of its kill potential and the ability to remove stuff, but it's definitely a very grim bargain in terms of what it is that you're trying to do. I think this card's kind of annoying on both sides. When it works way too well, and when it doesn't work, or when it works against you, you don't feel particularly good for playing it. So yeah, not a fan of the design of this card, but hey, it's out there, and Stonescar aggro decks will certainly be playing it because they have good ability to deal with stuff like Sandstorm Titan and other sort of big, nasty creatures. It's an interesting card to be sure. We'll see what Stonescar aggro does with it and whether or not it's going to be worth the price of admission. But my gut says that maybe not as much now. Dize Cabal Racketeer, 1/4 unblockable. Summon, you may spend power equal to an enemy unit's strength to steal that unit while you have Dize. So a 1/4 for 3 with unblockable at double shadow is not an amazing stat line, but certainly something that is capable of carrying weapons and doing some pretty nasty stuff. But also, notably, the card can steal Aurelian Merchant and any card with 0 attack for free, and it can be played on 4 to steal any card with 1 attack for free as well, or for close to free as well, with very little difficulty. It's also a big power sink later on where you can steal a bunch of other stuff. You can steal big dragons, you can steal little dragons, you can steal Grodos Strangers, you can steal really anything you feel like, as long as Dize Cabal Racketeer has the power to play it out. But then you have to defend the Dize to keep the card and keep a hold of whatever it is that you're stealing. Even so, stealing a card with this type of effect is very, very powerful. This is the cheapest we've ever seen it printed, and it does allow you to get rid of cards that are actually like really actively irritating to you, such as Aurelian Merchant. So I think that it's got some real potential in control decks and other types of decks to mess with you and your opponent. You're going to have to run some Corrupts or Felraux's Choices or Unseals or other types of sort of like more irritating cards to make sure that Dize stays alive, otherwise the card is not going to hold. But both Feln and Argenport are capable of protecting this card to some extent, and you can also just mess with your opponent's stuff with Sabotage and make it a little bit harder to kill Dize that way. So in those instances, Dize seems pretty solid. The value that he provides is very interesting. It's a delicate balance between like figuring out a way to basically have weapons and ways to make a Dize actually dangerous on the board, while also making use of that steal effect, because I think just the steal effect is maybe not enough to really justify the card. But if you can get that balance together and actually like put all of those different things into your deck, then the card seems to have like a decent amount of strength. So I'll give it like a solid like B as far as how good it is and what it can do. There's some real potential for this to be a very powerful card in tier 1 deck. There's also some potential for it to not do anything, depending on what the balance of cards is in your deck and how that measures up against the big bombs of the format. Edge of Uprising is next. We got a big Skycrag relic weapon. So 8 for a 6/6. That's not quite the strength of, say, a Sword of the Sky King, but it's still a decently statted relic weapon that kills most big things and deals with, even stuff like Mokto with a relevant amount of benefits. So that kind of stat line does mean that you can play it and get some decent value out of it at 8, even if you're not using the alternate cost. When you deal damage to an enemy, draw a card and discard a card. Useful ability for basically getting through your deck, and generally a powerful ability to be having on any type of card. Edge of Uprising costs 1 less for each of your units with 1 strength or less while it's in your hand. So you can't play it from your void or anything for cheaper, or from your deck or anything for cheaper. You can't even search for it for cheaper if you're trying to pick it up with some sort of relic matter synergy. But if you have a bunch of Grenadin or some other type of format, then you have a really strong relic weapon that you can use to augment those Grenadin and basically make your threats a little bit more threatening. Playing cheap relic weapons like this is usually a really good answer to harsh roll type effects. If your opponent is waiting to play something like a Shenra Speaks or a Harsh Roll on turn 5, you have 3 to 4 Grenadin out on turn 4, and you play an Edge of Uprising. Now you have a 6/6 weapon that is messing with your opponent's stuff. If they Harsh Roll, they're still taking 6 damage, and you're getting to do the draw a card, discard card to search for particular answers and pick up the best cards for your particular setup. If you have Echo cards and anything that actually benefits from being discarded, then Edge of Uprising is even stronger. This seems like a very powerful card. In general, reduced cost relic weapons seem like they have always been very, very strong. It's not as good as, say, Stormholt Knife, but it is nonetheless a card that has a lot of potential to be very, very nasty and gives you a really new way to play Skycrag overall. I'd say this is a pretty Skycrag weapon. It's nice to see a Skycrag relic weapon. This is territory that hasn't been explored. It's one of my favorite designs out of the 5, and I think that it's a pretty interesting card with also a pretty decent look to it. So cool stuff. Really, really fun card overall. And that brings us to the Huru card of the set, and the last card we'll be reviewing today, Vorlunk Corps. Killer Overwhelm, invulnerable to damage on your turn, Paladin, Dinosaur. A pair of types that we haven't seen together before, although it's probably going to be valued for one or the other in terms of what kind of tribal setup you're doing. If you're doing dinosaurs, you're certainly not unhappy to have a 4/2 Killer Overwhelm that's invulnerable to damage the turn it comes out, since that will be an effective removal card immediately, and then a unit that has to be dealt with and carries weapons really well a little bit later on. So yeah, the card is kind of strong in that respect. You can certainly get a decent amount of good value out of it, provided that Vorlunk Corps can actually get the removal that it wants. If you're facing off against a Mokto or something that's like a 5/6 or a 6/6, then Vorlunk Corps doesn't really do anything, and that makes the invulnerable to damage ability a little bit worse. But the card has Overwhelm, which provides it with some pretty unique reach. It carries weapons really well. It carries Aegis really well. In those situations, like the fact that it is somewhat resilient as a threat and kind of has to be dealt with, I think that it's pretty reasonable for its cost. It certainly seems like a underpowered stat line, but I think all of the different skills on this really work well together and have good synergy with each other. The card just gets what it wants in terms of the ability to pressure for damage, the ability to remove threats of smaller types while also continuing that pressure for damage, and the ability to survive in sticky situations at ways that you wouldn't necessarily see it. It's still going to get Blazing Salvoed on your off turns, but there's also a lot of stuff that's sort of pressuring people on your regular turns. You can do Enthroned Svecha, you can do Celestial of Light, you can do Hammer of Authority. There's a lot of ways to make it so it's a little bit harder for your opponents to do stuff when it's not when it's not a card that you can actually mess with. Although actually Celestial and never mind about Celestial and Hammer of Authority. Those are on your turn as well. So, but yeah, there's some ways that you can pressure and sort of force Vorlunk Corps to be a little bit more resilient to damage-based effects. Lots of good counter spells, lots of good ways to sort of mess with this card. I think this card has some potential in Huru, even though it is a fairly low stat line for its 5 cost. I also think it's one of the more exciting cards and interesting cards of of the 5 that we've seen. So yeah, it seems really interesting, and big dinosaurs / big paladins both seem like kind of a fun thing. I really like Huru paladins. I think it's a pretty interesting format. So and also I like that this is an odd card and not an even card. In any case, this is a pretty interesting option available. Finally, we have one last thing to talk about, but that is our card breakdown for the day. So in addition to that, we also have a new playmat coming as part of one of the bundles. I believe it's part of the Legendary bundle. So if you are purchasing the Legendary bundle, you get to see a new playmat. It's called the Shadow Archenport playmat, and it looks a little like this. So let's go ahead and bring that to the front. Why not? So yeah, like you'll be able to play on this playmat with the very sort of flat, fun tile look. I actually think this is a really nice playmat. It looks very clean. I love the sort of flatter tile looks. Like I feel like playing cards on flat tiles has just kind of it has a good feel to it overall, so it's definitely something to note that can be like really, really strong. There's some cool stuff going on with that. I think it's pretty interesting and probably worth picking up one of the bundles for, although I'd rather purchase it individually overall. In any case, that is our card breakdown for the day. So yeah, 23 new cards coming in. I'm looking forward to breaking down the spoilers as they come out. We will definitely be doing a lot of spoiler breakdowns as stuff comes out here. So stay tuned for that. We'll continue to talk about the different cards. This is definitely a mixed review, I would say, overall. I'm less enthused about some of the lore things, Jack and Icaria coming out. I'm not so enthused about the cost of the bundle for the playmat. If you are looking to pick up the playmat in particular, I think that's like a pretty expensive playmat if you're trying to pick it up. It's something like $49.99 or $45.99. I have to double check. $44.99. So yeah, like it's the cost of the bundle is a little bit tricky. I'm also not enthused about the meta not changing up too much. Like 23 new cards is interesting, but I'm pretty done with this set overall. I don't really feel like there's a lot left to be done with it, and I think it's gotten a little bit toxic as time has gone on. So here's hoping that the 23 new cards really shake up the set, but also like here's hoping there's some more live balancing going on with the set as well, and here's hoping that another set is somewhere around the corner. In any case, we're certainly going to be playing with the new cards. There's definitely no doubt about that. So I'm excited to be talking about them. Stay tuned for more. We'll be on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Patreon, all under LocoPojo. And you can find me in all of those places. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you all have a lot of fun with the new cards. See you next time. Cheers.